Okay, good afternoon. My name is Terry Glavin. I am counsel for the Department of Procurement Services at the City of Chicago. First off, again, I want to welcome you on behalf of Mayor Rahm Emanuel, Commissioner Jamie Rhee. We want to welcome you to this workshop and thank you for taking time out of your work schedules to be here to learn about doing business with the City of Chicago. As mentioned earlier, the presentation is going to be streaming live. We're going to be presenting, or I'm going to be presenting for about an hour. I'm going to try and reserve some time towards the end for a question and answer session. So if you would, if you'll reserve your questions until completion of the presentation, that way we can get through as much material as possible, and then I'll be happy to address any questions. Before I get any further, I think it's also important to always give my contact information out so that I can be an ongoing resource to vendors as needed. You might have questions not just today but in the future, and you can do two things. You can go back online on YouTube, you can review this workshop on YouTube, but also you can reach out to me in the future by email, or there's a number you can reach me at the office. So my email address is my name, so it's terrence@cityofchicago.org, and an office number where I can be reached is 312-744-0851. If you reach out to me, I hope to be the best resource for you at the city, but if there's a topic that maybe I think there's a better resource, I'll do my best to track down that resource for you or that expert. My email again is my name, so it's terrence@cityofchicago.org. And just in case, the number again is 312-744-0851. You're welcome. So reach out in the future. I will either be able to help you myself, or if I think there's a better resource, I'm going to identify that resource and try and get you in touch so that we can be of ongoing assistance to you in the vendor community. Today, we're going to talk about doing business with the City of Chicago. Keep in mind, there are other workshops that get into a great amount of detail about specific topics. So this workshop is really sort of a higher level view of doing business with the city. But whether it's outside this room, up on the wall, we have a workshop schedule posted, whether it's at our web page where we post our workshop schedule, please go to the schedule, look for specific topics that are of relevance to your business. There might be just a few, there might be a lot, depending on what line of business you're in. But check out that workshop schedule. I teach a number of workshops in addition to this one, but we have experts in different subject matter areas from our department that teach the other workshops. They're all worthwhile, so try to attend as many as you can. I hope to see you there. You'll get a great amount of detail at those additional workshops. For the Doing Business with the City workshop, we cover a number of topics which we'll see today. First of all, we're going to talk about the mission statement of the Department of Procurement Services, the laws that govern the procurement process, types of procurement, and when I say types of procurement, I mean the method that we use to put contracts into place, and it can vary depending on what it is we're trying to buy as a city. Certification, and when I say certification, that includes minority business enterprise certification, women-owned business enterprise certification, business enterprises owned by people with disabilities, and there's a number of certifications. Again, there's a separate workshop just on certification, and if you're eligible for certification and you get certified, what you can do with it. So keep in mind there are more details at additional workshops. I'll also talk today about contract monitoring and compliance. Once you get a contract, what are some of your obligations and how do you make sure you stay in compliance? Talk a little bit about programs and bid incentives. I teach another workshop just on that topic. The whole workshop covers incentives and programs. So if it sounds interesting to you, what I give you today, then run with that, and I hope to see you at the more specific workshop on that topic, which I present. Lastly, I'll cover navigating the Department of Procurement Services website and open up for question and answers. So, the Department of Procurement Services. We are the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. Why do I emphasize the City of Chicago? And the reason for that is you may think that everything going on around you here in the city is all being put into place and being purchased by the City of Chicago through the Department of Procurement Services. But the reality of it is that there are other sister agencies all around us that are operating and making purchases, like Chicago Transit Authority, Metropolitan Pier and Exposition Authority, Park District, and they all have their own procurement departments. They have their own rules, policies, and procedures. And they also have their own websites and their own advertisements for their opportunities. And I mention that not because I'm going to teach you all about all the governmental units today, but I mention it because if you're doing business with the city and you're looking for opportunities, then I want you to know, and this is just a practical tip, there are other opportunities that are out there. And one way to find out about them is to start doing some research. And this goes towards the topic later about our website. But go to cityofchicago.org/procurement. Or you can just go to cityofchicago.org. Go to the top menu bar. There's a government tab. Put your cursor on that. It'll drop down a menu. And there's a list of all the city departments that are with us. But then there's also a link to sister agencies. We call them sister agencies. Those are all those governmental units that are all around us but separate from us. You can click on there and you can go to their websites and see what opportunities they have. Just so you have access to every available opportunity. So that's just a practical tip. And that's another thing I'm going to try and do during today's workshop is throw in a couple practical tips that go even beyond our process, and hopefully that'll be helpful to you as well. So the Department of Procurement Services is the contracting authority for the City of Chicago. We purchase for all those departments that are in that menu that I talked about. Chicago Police Department, Chicago Department of Transportation, Public Health, and there are a number of departments. So if you want to do business with the city, another good thing for you to do is go to the drop-down menu I just described. Not just to the sister agencies, but go to the links for each and every of the departments, and by looking at what it is they do at their specific homepage, you can get an idea, I'm sure, of what are the kind of things they're buying. For example, if you are in engineering and you are specialized in engineering for road construction, well, you might want to go to CDOT, Chicago Department of Transportation's homepage, and see, what are the press releases? What's going on? What are all the things that CDOT is doing? And that'll kind of give you an idea of what it is maybe in the area of engineering that CDOT might be buying. And that'll be some business intelligence that'll be helpful to you when you're anticipating doing business with the city. And that's not just exclusive to CDOT. If you're into software, selling software or servicing software, go to DOIT, Department of Information Technology. Look at their website, see what it is that they are buying or planning to buy. Because at the end of the day, I can talk all about the process of putting contracts in place that create the business relationship between you and the vendor. You, the vendor, and the department. But once you get that contract, it's very similar to a private sector business relationship. You've got something you want to sell. The city's got something they want to buy. You've got a contract to sell it. And from there, it's really a normal business relationship. They place orders, you deliver, you charge, and you get paid by the city's comptroller. So the business relationship is very similar to that of a private business relationship. But how does that business relationship form? I want to talk a little bit about that. And in order to do that, I think it's important to talk about the laws governing the procurement process. So we, the Department of Procurement Services, to establish a business relationship between you and what we call user departments, or all the departments out there, we need to put contracts into place. And we do that through a process that has integrity, that is fair, that is reliable, where you, the vendors, have certain expectations about the competition that's going to take place for those contracts, and we provide the forum for that competition. And we don't just make it up as we go along. We have laws that create the structure for that competition for contracts, and those laws exist at the federal level if there's any federal dollars involved. State law is also involved. And then there's municipal code that creates our authority and the structure for our procurement process. Now within even the municipal code, we have authority to create policies and procedures which are even more specific. So if you're going to do business with the city, go to our homepage, our department's homepage. Go to cityofchicago.org/procurement, and there are links to our policies and procedures. I mentioned that contracts are awarded by competition for the most part. And what's key to any competition? What's the key to you being competitive? It's to know the rules of the competition. So I think that's critical. So I encourage you to go look at our policies and procedures and become familiar with them. It'll help you compete for contracts. And I'll talk a little bit more about that competition in a little bit. But the law at the state level that creates this competition for most contracts is the Illinois Municipal Purchasing Act. And there's two sections of it. We use the one that's for over 500,000 people because that's our population. And there's a whole lot of detail in that statute about how procurement's supposed to operate. But there's really a primary takeaway that I think at this point is important for you to know. We award contracts for the most part to the lowest responsive and responsible bidder. Okay, so those are three elements that are pretty critical. You all know from participating maybe in auctions or whether it's certain online auctions, like competing for making purchases, for example. You all know what the lowest price is, right? It's whoever submits that price that is at the bottom or is the cheapest, and that's what we're looking for. The law wants us to try and get items or services at the cheapest price. But in addition to that, vendors delivering those goods or services typically have to be responsive and responsible. Responsive simply means you're presently capable of delivering what we're asking for. Responsiveness, it means that you are delivering what we want the way we want it. So I hope I stated that right, but basically responsiveness is giving us what we want the way we want it. Responsibility is being presently capable of delivering what we want the way we want it. And as long as you meet those requirements, I think you're well underway towards competing well for getting a city contract. Now, there are various types of procurement. Those types of procurement or methods of putting a contract in place vary depending on what we're buying. So it's helpful to start thinking in terms of, are we buying goods or are we buying services? Sometimes we're buying both under the same contract. But that's sort of a beginning way to break it down, because by law, what process we use to put contracts into place is oftentimes dictated by what it is we're buying, goods or services. Goods are those tangible things that you can buy. Typically, many vendors provide those similar goods. Services, however, can be broken down into two subcategories: professional services and work services. Professional services are those that are typically of a highly skilled nature. Usually the providers are highly credentialed. We, by law, are allowed to use somewhat of a more subjective process for awarding professional service contracts. We don't just go to the low bidder. And the example I tend to use is, if you're looking for health care for yourself, do you just, whether it's go online or in the print advertisements, do you just look around for that lowest priced doctor to provide you your health care? No. When it comes to certain specialized professional services, you have a budget, and just like the city has a budget. You don't want to spend more than you have to, but when you're looking for professional services, quality and skill has to at least be evaluated as well. And along that way, we have a process I'll describe later to make sure that we get the best value. So we get that balance of good skill at a good price. And the law allows us to have a little more of a subjective process to make sure that we don't just go to the low bidder and get substandard professional services. Now, work services is the other type of service work services are more common in nature. They're still extremely valuable to the city, but by law they're not considered as highly skilled. So for example, security guard services, landscaping services, they're extremely valuable to the city. And there are certain licenses you need to perform those services. There are certain training or experience that you need to perform those services. But at the end, they're not considered by law as highly skilled. They're more commonly provided by a number of service providers. So by law, we typically award those by competitive bid, similar to commodities. And I'm telling you all this because what you're going to be looking for is you're going to be looking for these opportunities in the newspaper. We advertise in the Sun-Times. These opportunities for contracts are going to be available online at our website. We also have what's called DPS alerts. You can sign up for electronic notification of opportunities. And you can also come in here and pick up hard copies of advertisements or lists of opportunities. And when you see opportunities, it's going to be just a little summary, a little synopsis of what a project is about. For example, you might look in the Sun-Times and you'll look in the classified ad section and you'll see that there's a advertisement for a number of governmental units, including the City of Chicago. And there'll be a little synopsis like, City of Chicago is seeking to purchase police cars for the Chicago Police Department. Well, when you read that, you don't know all the details, right? You don't know, is the police vehicle an SUV? Do we want SUVs or do we want sedans? Do we want four-door vehicles or two-door vehicles? How big is the trunk size of the vehicles for police to carry their equipment? There's all these details. In order to find out what those details are, you need to come on down, or electronically you can receive what we call the bid package. And that includes specifications. And specifications are going to be the very detailed documents that tell you what it is that we're trying to buy and exactly what it is in detail that we're going to be purchasing. You need to read those specifications to the letter, to the every paragraph, every letter, to make sure you can deliver what we want exactly the way we want it. Remember I mentioned responsiveness? You want to make sure you can be responsive to what we're asking for in detail. If we're asking for SUV police motor vehicles in a bid package, even if you can get from your supplier the best price on sedans, regular cars, that's not what we're looking to buy. So you can't offer us sedans and expect to win the contract. You have to give us what we want the way we want it, and that's how you become responsive. So the point I'm driving across to you is that when we award contracts, we award them for typically goods, professional services, or work services. Now, I've been talking about competitive bidding, and what's important to note is that when we award contracts by competitive bid, oftentimes we have what we call regular or large orders, and we have small orders. Okay? Now, small orders are orders by definition under $100,000. The law allows us to follow a less formal process for awarding contracts that are considered small orders. So we can receive quotes that we solicit by telephone, fax, or written quotation. We can post the advertisement on the DPS website. We don't necessarily have to post in the Sun-Times, even though we might. We also, on small orders, we solicit City of Chicago certified MBE, WBE vendors first. And MBE, WBE compliance is required for bids that are over $10,000, so between $10,000 and $100,000. So I'll take a second to talk about MBE, WBE compliance. So MBE, minority business enterprise, WBE, women-owned business enterprise. When you're doing business with the city, there is municipal code that sets goals. And those goals include getting participation by certified MBEs and WBEs on contracts. Or in certain instances, we go directly and we target firms that are MBE or WBE firms for contracts. So in this example, say we have a small order and as I pointed out, MBE, WBE firms are solicited first. What that means is that we basically give MBE and WBE firms the first bite at the apple as far as competing for certain small orders. And that means that non-certified firms are not even involved in the competition at that point. Now, if there are no certified firms in a certain industry, then it can perhaps be opened up to non-certified firms. Now, say we're not targeting MBE, WBE firms at a certain point, but compliance is still required because the contract is over $10,000. Compliance basically means participation. Participation by ordinance means that a certain percentage of the work will be subcontracted out to an MBE firm, and a certain percentage of the work will be subcontracted out to a WBE firm. Historically, the goals were set at 25% participation by MBE firms and 5% participation by WBE firms. So in that example, what happens? Say you have a, well, I have to keep it as a small order. So my example will be a $50,000 contract is awarded. So 25% of that work on that $50,000 small order will be subcontracted to an MBE firm. That MBE firm needs to perform actual work on the contract. You can't just pay somebody to satisfy the requirement. Because the goal is not just to make sure MBE and WBE firms get city dollars. It's also to make sure they get experience and that they build capacity through experience so that they ultimately can grow and bid on contracts themselves as a prime. Now, in my example, 25% of real work is performed by the MBE, 25% of real dollars are forwarded to the MBE for work, and if the WBE was on contract, 5% of the real work would be done by a WBE, and 5%, or $2,500 in my example, would be paid to the WBE firm for their work. So it's real work for real money to build capacity for MBE and WBE firms. For competitive bids, as I mentioned, we advertise in the Chicago Sun-Times in the daily classified ad section. You can also find the opportunities at cityofchicago.org/procurement. Here in the bid and bond room, we have hard copies. Bid solicitation period is 10 to 30 calendar days. That's how long we got the solicitation out there for you. And then plan to that a bid deposit may be required. Now, when I say bid deposit, we talk about bid deposits or bid bonds. Sometimes we even talk about bid fees. Now, there's a separate workshop on those topics. That workshop I also include performance and payment bond issues. So there's a separate workshop on it. But what I'll say to you is this. When you're doing business with the city, when you're competing for a contract, you're going to submit a bid, right? And when you submit a bid, if the project is completely funded by city dollars, you need to hold firm for 60 days. If there's even $1 of federal money, you have to hold firm for 90 days. What does that mean? Hold firm basically means you promise to honor your bid for 60 days if it's city funded or 90 days if it's federally funded. Why do I tell you this? Because if you are bidding on a project, it does take us a little time to evaluate all the bids, make sure everyone's responsible, and to award a contract. During that time, you have to commit. So we don't want to do all that work evaluating bids, come to you 45 days later on a city-funded project and say, congratulations, we want to do business with you. And you say, oh no, 5 days ago there was an opportunity in Milwaukee. I'm going to go do that. I'm committing my resources to Milwaukee. I don't want to do that contract. Well, you can't do that. If you submit a bid, you got to do what's called hold firm for 60 days or 90 if it's federally funded. If you try to withdraw, you forfeit a bid bond if a bid bond was required. If you honor your commitment, or if we just cancel the solicitation, or if we award to another vendor because you're not the lowest bidder, you get that bid bond back. But keep in mind, there might be a bid bond required. For major projects, sometimes there's a bid fee. It's rare, but sometimes a non-refundable bid fee is required. Whether or not it's required will all be in those specification and bid documents I told you about. So remember, you read the advertisement in the paper, you came on down, you picked up a bid package, and I told you read every line of every page to make sure it's something you want to commit to. Well, there will even be lines in there about whether or not there's a bid fee required, whether or not there's a bid deposit required, whether or not there's insurance required, and what type. So read all those documents carefully. Now, if there is a competitive bid, keep in mind there might be a pre-bid conference. There also might be a pre-bid inspection if there's maybe work at a certain site, like construction or demolition, where it's important for you to know what you're bidding on before you put together your price proposal. So you're not just thinking the project's going to be one thing and then we all lose because it turned out to be something else than you thought. So pre-bid sessions are for informational purposes. They are typically optional, but again, read the bid package, because if they're required and you fail to attend, your ultimate bid might be rejected because you were non-responsive. So responsiveness isn't just about getting yourself in your own mind capable of delivering what we want the way we want it. You've got to submit all your documents the way we ask you to. Where it says you have to initial things, if it says you have to appear at a pre-bid conference, all those things are necessary, and if you don't do them, it can be a basis for rejecting your bid for non-responsiveness. So read those documents. At the pre-bid, if there is one, you can review specifications, you can ask questions and get answers. There's Q&A sessions. Again, if it's optional, bidders' attendance is still encouraged. If questions are asked at the pre-bid, sometimes the questions can be good ones and require answers from us. And all the bidders benefit from getting answers. So if a question raises a good issue and there needs to be an answer, we can send out to the vendors clarifications. Those are written answers. If sometimes a question is so good that it actually calls into question whether our specs are flawed or maybe we need to adjust them a little bit because maybe we got something wrong in our specifications, then we'll send out what's called an addendum. And that goes out, and it is something that you will make sure you want to read, but also that you initial and return with your bid package when you submit your bid, because we need to know that you're aware of the addendum so that we know that you're aware of all your obligations. That's another example of something that can make your bid non-responsive, is if you fail to initial where you're supposed to on an addendum and you fail to complete it with your bid package when you submit it. It makes us think, hey, your bid's not really solid because you didn't know about this obligation over here. And you might have read it. It might be in your office. You forgot to put it in your bid package, but we don't know that. So make sure you do everything you're supposed to do when you submit your bid package so that we know that there's a meeting of the minds about what the project's about so that we know your bid is good. Now, if there's not a pre-bid meeting, just remember you can contact the person in charge of the project. It'll be listed on the bid documents. You can call and ask your question. If your question is appropriate for an answer, it will be provided to you. And so you can always reach out to our department, reach out to the person that is in charge of the project and ask questions if there's no pre-bid conference. If there's a pre-bid, you should ask it at the pre-bid, but you can reach out to the project manager if there is not a pre-bid. I've hit upon this quite a few times, but here are some critical parts that I think I always want to reinforce. When you get that bid package and you're going to submit it, fill out all required information. If there are certain bid documents that must be submitted and executed with the bid, if you fail to do so, as I mentioned, your bid could be rejected. Where your signature is required, make sure you sign it. Make sure it's someone with contracting authority that actually signs. So if you have a company with more than a few employees and you have someone who maybe is in charge of managing your contracts, if you haven't given them that authority to sign contracts, then we can't honor the bid submitted by that person. Typically, we want the president of the company signing the bid, and then it usually is acknowledged by the secretary of the company. But at the end of the day, it's got to be binding, so you got to have contracting authority, and all signatures should be notarized as well. When you submit the bid, include any bid deposits in proper form. Remember, cash is not accepted. Bid deposits are usually 5% of the bid, and bid deposits are normally, as I mentioned, refundable. The bid fee is non-refundable, may be required for some projects that are over $100,000. But I highlight the last point. If the bid is due, for example, at 11 a.m. on the bid opening date, don't drop it off at 11:01. Don't drop it off at 11:02, because if you're late, we have to draw the line somewhere, right? Because otherwise the bids might come in at 12, then 1, then 3. So my point being is, if you're late, your bid might be rejected as being non-responsive. So make sure your bid is on time. When the bid is submitted, it's going to be read aloud. I'll mention it later, but when we do the bid opening, we read the bids aloud. You'll actually know what everyone bid, what their dollar values were, and then within 24 hours, we tabulate and post all the bids online, so you can actually see how the competition went. Bid openings are Monday through Friday, except for major holidays, 11 a.m. here at City Hall in the bid and bond room. Bids are opened and read aloud, they're tabulated, and as I mentioned, they can be reviewed within 24 hours on the DPS website. Now, when you compete for a contract, say that the contract is going to be awarded to you. You're the lowest responsible bidder. You don't get to start work that day. And I mentioned that for planning's sake, right? There's time for the evaluation process, but then there's also the time of getting the relationship into place properly. So as you're organizing your business, whether it's your cash flow or whatever it is that is of interest to you, keep in mind that it takes a little bit of time to get that relationship in place and started properly. So plan accordingly. Make sure you're aware that that there's a award process. So we make a determination regarding the bidder's responsiveness and responsibility. The commissioner or the head of the department that's going to be your client or customer has to make a recommendation of award, making sure that the process was followed and that the vendor was chosen appropriately. We package up the bids. The bids and the contract documents have to be routed through the signature cycle. When we say signature cycle, mayor's office has to sign, the city's comptroller has to sign. If there's a performance and payment bond required, especially for certain construction projects, those bonds have to be reviewed to make sure that they provide protection for the city. But at the end of the day, the contract is awarded to the lowest and responsible bidder for competitive bids. And with that, your business relationship can begin. Now that is the typical process for commodities. And as I mentioned, for work services. Now, what if you provide professional services? Who in here provides professional services based on how I described? Okay, so half the room. So if your services are more professional in nature, you're going to go through what's called an RFP process. The process starts out pretty much the same as the commodity process or service process. We advertise in the paper, the website, but when we advertise, we're not asking you to submit just your lowest responsive and responsible bid, right? We're asking you for RFPs, or requests for proposals. We're asking you to submit a proposal, a persuasive document telling us why you're the best vendor at the best value. Okay? And we do this typically because the city doesn't always have expertise in every area of professional services. So we issue these RFP for professional services. And what we do is when we receive these proposals, we form evaluation committees at the city. And when there's an evaluation committee, formed, they review the proposals, they compare them, they score them. They might even bring the vendors in for in-person presentations, and those presentations might be part of the scoring process. And after that scoring process is complete, the vendors are ranked by score, and then an agreement or contract is awarded to the professional service provider that is most highly scored. Now, what happens if there's a certain need that we have that is on an ongoing basis? We know generally what the work is going to be, but we don't quite know the real fine details yet. We find out on a project-specific basis what the details are going to be in some cases. So what do? Instead of an RFP, sometimes we form a pool of vendors through what's called an RFQ, or a request for qualification process. The process is very similar to the RFP process. We advertise, but instead of asking for proposals from professional service providers, we ask for them to submit their qualifications. It's like asking you to submit your resumes. Depending on the complexity of the work, it could be binders and binders of information, an extensive corporate resume. Sometimes it can be a little simpler if it's, smaller projects, less complicated. But what we do is we ask for qualifications, you submit them. Same thing happens as an RFP. We form evaluation groups, we review the qualifications, we might bring you in for presentations, you get scored. But as a result of those evaluation committees, we award what we call master consulting agreements. And we typically award multiple MCAs, or master consulting agreements, and create a vendor pool for a certain number of years. And what happens is while you're in that pool, work's going to come along. And the example I'll use is, and this applies to other professional services, but the example I'll use is, say you're that engineering firm I mentioned earlier for road construction. What do we know about road construction in government infrastructure? Roads deteriorate sometimes faster than we thought. Or sometimes there's federal funding involved, and the federal funding comes available at certain times, but not others. So the projects they're not always projected as easily as some other purchases that we make. So we need these pools, and pools of engineers would be the example in this case. So say, for example, there's funding available, there's a road that needs work in my example. We have a pool of engineers, we want to get some engineering done in anticipation of road construction. We go to the pool, we solicit the work from that pool. Now, outsiders that don't have MCAs, don't have agreements, can't compete during that window of years. It's just the pool. And what happens is we ultimately will award to one or multiple vendors in the pool project-specific work. So say Milwaukee Avenue is the street in my example. Well, what do we know about Milwaukee Avenue? It's an extremely long street. It goes almost from the downtown area of the city. I think it goes almost to the state line up to Wisconsin. It goes pretty far, right? But in the city, we know it's a long street, and there's always work that's needed on such a long street. So say there's a section from, let's say, North Avenue to Damon that needs work. Okay, and there's funding available. So we go to the pool, we want engineering work for that stretch of road. What we do is we then get very specific in what's called a task order. And that task order is awarded to one or multiple vendors from the pool. And that task order will tell the vendor exactly what we want for that specific section of road. And it's like a mini contract within the umbrella of the MCA, which is the bigger, higher level contract. But it'll be within the scope of the MCA. Now, it's just like any other business relationship once you get that task order, right? You're going to get orders from CDOT, Chicago Department of Transportation. You get that order, you're going to perform the work. When you perform the work, if the work was acceptable, CDOT will receive an invoice from you. And if that invoice gets approved, they will forward it to the comptroller, and the comptroller will send you payment. So once you have that contract in place, and even in the case of task orders, that business relationship is very similar to the private sector. It's not like some wildly different process that we use once that contract's in place. It's really just doing business. It's just you happen to be doing business with your client, which is a city department. So as I use that as an example for a reason. Most commonly, these RFQs are used for architecture and engineering, design contracts, and certain other categories of engineering. But keep in mind, it's not limited to that. So it's available or something we use for a variety of professional services that we need. The next slide is about job order contracting. Who here is in construction? One person. Okay. I don't cover a lot of detail about JOC, or job order contracting, because there's a whole separate workshop that gets into fine detail about JOC. It is presented by experts in the area of job order contracting, but I put it in my presentation really just to give you something that not many people are familiar with unless they're in government contracting, specifically construction. So I figure I'll put it out there and make you aware of it. And if it sounds like it's something of interest to you, I encourage you to go to the workshop and get the fine details. The high-level view of it is job order contracting is just another way we put contracts into place, but it's typically for small to medium-sized construction projects. It's competitive in nature, but what we do is it was developed a while back, and a number of governmental units use JOC in similar fashion. What there is it was determined that construction projects of a small to medium size can typically be broken down into common tasks that make up construction projects. Those tasks were put into a pricing book, and that pricing book is used for competition purposes. Bidders can basically bid discounts off of those prices from the pricing book, and by way of calculating those discount off price proposals, we can figure out who's the lowest bidder and come up with a agreement and award a contract for these small to medium-sized construction projects. That gives you a taste. You are not going to know all about job order contracting from that, of course, but if it sounds like it's something you're interested in, if you're even involved in any way in construction, I would say attend the JOC workshop. It'll be worth your while to attend. And there's a little more information on job order contracting. And remember, value of the JOC contract depends upon department needs and budget. Okay. Certification. I touched on it earlier. I'm going to keep it at a high level because there's another workshop on certification, and not everybody is going to be interested in the actual certification side, but I think everybody should be interested in the overall importance of certification. It's important to everybody that's involved in city contracting. So what are the types of certification? There's MBE, Minority Business Enterprise Certification, WBE, Women-Owned Business Enterprise Certification. As I mentioned, BEPD, Business Enterprises Owned by People with Disabilities. There's DBE, Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. Now, basically what that is certification, as I described it earlier, for MBEs and WBEs, but at the federal level, they don't break it down really as MBEs and WBEs. At the federal level, they have more of an umbrella certification, DBE. And whenever we use federal dollars, we oftentimes have to follow federal rules. It's sort of a give and take of using federal money. Federal government oftentimes wants us to follow certain rules that they have to ensure the proper spending and that certain goals are being achieved that the federal government has. So they use DBE certification for federally funded projects. And then there's ACDBE, that's Airport Concession Disadvantaged Business Enterprise. That is basically DBE for certified firms that are doing work on concession contracts out at the airport. Now there's a whole workshop on all these, but that gives you sort of a flavor, because if you feel like you might be eligible for any of those, I encourage you to attend the workshop. There's a lot more to it than this, but at a basic eligibility level, certified firms must have the person that is the basis for eligibility be at least 51% owner, and that person or people have to control the firm, have to really operate it, right? You can't just have a little small ownership in a business, not do anything for it. You don't even have background in that industry, but someone wants to get their firm certified and take advantage of the program. No, it doesn't work that way. You have to base the certification on a individual or individuals that are from the historically disadvantaged contracting groups, and they have to be 51% or more owner. They have to have experience in the areas that they're doing work in, and their work within that company has to be meaningful. They have to actually have control of the company. So it's a program that has purpose of addressing the disadvantage that certain groups have historically had in government contracting, and in order to address or remedy those past situations, it has to be meaningful. And these are a few of the methods that the program makes it meaningful as far as addressing the needs. The contract monitoring compliance portion. When you're involved in city contracting, doing business with the city, when we say MBEs and WBEs have to be involved or DBEs have to be involved, we mean it. So when you commit to a contract, you are going to identify who you're using as far as certified firms. You're going to actually use them, and you're actually going to report your payments to them, to us, and we actually monitor to make sure payments to subcontractors are made. And we take it very seriously, so please keep in mind that when you commit to these contracts, participation is actually monitored, reviewed, and even investigated. Part of our department's work, mine specifically, is we work with the Office of the Inspector General on investigating a number of fraud, waste, and abuse matters, and that includes failure to meet contracting compliance requirements. But it's not just participation issues. There are certain residency programs where we try to get Chicago residents involved in the contracting process, business opportunities. We also monitor equal employment opportunity. There are certain bids incentives and programs out there, like local manufacturer bid incentive, local business preferences, veteran-owned business preferences, and we monitor to make sure that legitimate businesses are getting the opportunity to use those programs and incentives. Now, how can you achieve compliance? Let's go back to MBE, WBE participation and DBE participation. You can get compliance by having the prime as an MBE, WBE, or DBE. You can have joint venturing. So say, for example, you're a certified firm and you don't feel you have the capacity, the equipment, or the human resources to be able to cover a project that looks pretty big to you, but you want to get that project. Well, you can form joint ventures with other certified firms, and together maybe you have complementary resources, and together you might be able to achieve the award of a contract. So don't forget, joint venturing is a way not only to win contracts but also to meet compliance. As I mentioned, you can subcontract with certified firms to meet compliance, and then you can also use certified suppliers for materials to obtain compliance. You will be, as I mentioned, reporting your payments to subcontractors. Monthly subcontractor payment certifications are used. Weekly certified payrolls are reviewed, and we also look at waivers of liens. Programs and incentives. I teach another workshop on this topic, but get a feel for what programs and incentives are out there, because you get an idea of whether or not you want to attend my other workshop. Small business initiative for SBI construction projects. Those are basically like smaller construction projects where we allow certain construction firms, if they're small businesses, to compete exclusively for certain construction projects. We also have a diversity credit program where you can actually meet your compliance or portions of your compliance by using certified firms on your non-city contracts. So, for example, in your private sector work, if you're using certified firms, you may be eligible to bank that and use it to meet compliance on a city contract. We also have a mentor-protege program where you can, again, join forces, not necessarily as a joint venture, but where experienced larger firms can mentor smaller firms, and those larger firms can then get credit that works towards their participation on city contracts. For bid incentives, we have small business enterprise incentive, we have veteran-owned business enterprise incentive. Business enterprises owned by people with disabilities has an incentive. City-based manufacturers, city-based businesses, apprentice utilization, and also for vendors that utilize alternatively powered vehicles. What is a bid incentive? It typically works like this. Say there, and the percentage varies depending on what the project is. But let's say, for example, you qualify for one of these categories, and I'll just throw out an example. Say there's one of the categories, and it allows a 5% incentive. What that means is if you qualify, and let's say it's a competitive bid that you're submitting for a contract. Let's say you're competing and you submit a bid for $100,000, and you qualify for a bid incentive that has a 5% incentive. What that means is that for purposes of evaluation, your bid is discounted by 5%. So when we look at your bid, your $100,000 bid is actually viewed as $95,000 for evaluation purposes. Let's say the next competitor in your industry also bid and doesn't qualify for any programs, and they submit $100,000. Well, what would happen if there were no program? The two bids would be equal, and you would not necessarily win. But based on this bid incentive, 5%, for evaluation purposes, your $95,000 bid is the winner. You get the contract. But when you actually perform the work, you don't get penalized for using the incentive. You actually do get to bill out and get paid at $100,000. So that's really a quick summary of how incentives work, but I get into more detail at the workshop. Now, I'm going to get into the DPS website. We have a little bit of time left, but a few other things I want to point out about the interaction. I talked about how that business relationship is very similar to the private sector. Whether it's a competitive bid, whether it's RFP awarded a contract, at the end of the day, the road leads to a contract. That contract creates a business relationship between you and one of those many departments that are in that drop-down bar at the city's website. Whether it's Chicago Police Department, Chicago Public Library, Department of Information Technology, you're going to have a business relationship with one department, maybe multiple, and that business relationship is going to be based on the contract. Once you have that contract, they're going to call you or they're going to place orders. When you receive that order, you're going to make sure you're delivering what they asked for the way the contract says you're supposed to. Okay? And you're going to make sure that that contract says that you can deliver the items that are being asked for. But when you do deliver, you want to make sure that you've read every detail of that contract so you deliver by the day that it says. If it says you need to deliver within 10 days, you need to deliver within 10 days, not 15, not 20. If it says you're supposed to deliver quantities in 100, of 100 items per box, then you need to deliver 100 items per box. But at the end of the day, deliver according to the contract. When you do, doesn't matter whether it's professional service or whether it's commodity, you're going to invoice the department, not the Department of Procurement Services. Not that I'm trying to push you away from our department, but once we put that contract into place, we kind of step away from that business relationship. Our job is to get that relationship established, and then we step back. When we step back, you deliver those goods or services, you bill to the department. When you invoice the department, they're going to review it, and they're going to make sure, hey, did we get what we ordered? And someone in that department will confirm that what we asked for was delivered to the location at the time in the quantities we wanted, and it met the specifications. And if all that's true, they'll confirm it, and they'll say, okay, invoice approved. And they'll forward that invoice to the comptroller, and the comptroller will pay you. So that's the process. Now, what happens if that relationship gets a little bumpy? And business relationships do, right? Let's say, for example, you delivered, and you believe, in good faith, you delivered exactly what the contract required you to deliver. And that department says, this is not the way the contract reads. We're supposed to get something different. Well, it could be an honest disagreement, but how does it get resolved? That's when we step back in, if we receive notice from either the department or from you that there's some type of dispute. And we can step in after we receive something in writing, and we can mediate that disagreement. Maybe we'll tell the department, you have to approve the invoice. We think the vendor's right. Maybe we will send a cure letter to the vendor and say, vendor, you are wrong. Or respond and tell us why you're right. And if you don't do that within a certain amount of days, we may terminate your contract and put it back out to bid for another vendor to participate on. These we call disputes. There are policies on our webpage at the Department of Procurement Services website that cover these disputes. Make sure you follow the policies and procedures properly for disputing something, because there has to be integrity in that process too. Now let's say, take a step back, you competed for a contract, someone else got it, and you thought, hey, I was the lowest bidder. I didn't deserve this letter I got that said I'm not responsible. You can file what's called a bid protest, and those policies and procedures are also on our webpage, and you follow those procedures. Remember, also critical, these things have timelines, and they're in the policies and procedures. Make sure you make those timelines, because your dispute or your protest may become moot at a certain point if too much time passes. So follow those policies and procedures. All these items I'm talking about, policies, procedures, rules, DPS website. So cityofchicago.org/procurement. There are awarded contracts and modifications. You can search online for those. You can look and see what vendors on contracts are being paid and when they're being paid, and you can see those dollar amounts. You can see bid tabulations, as I mentioned earlier, weekly bid opportunities. If you're looking for certified firms to participate on your contracts that you're going to compete for, there's an MBWBE directory. Bid incentives are also available online, rules, regulations, and again, it's all available at cityofchicago.org/procurement. And this is just a quick screenshot of, if you go to our webpage, there's an icon in the middle, awarded contracts. Click on that, it'll take you to a search engine. You can look up all that information I just described, including existing and historical contracts, as well as payments. So there's a number of ways to search. You can look for EDSs, you can look up specific vendors, you can look up by project description. So there's a great deal of intelligence that you can gather on what we're doing and who also is in your industry already doing business with us, because maybe it'll help you network and get either business with them in the private sector or subcontracting opportunities through them on their city contracts. So there's a number of things you can learn. Lastly, we're very active on social media, so see us on Twitter, Facebook. There are many access points for Department of Procurement Services. I encourage you to use those access points to keep in touch with us. With that, I'm going to wrap it up because I actually pushed it right up to the very end. But I am going to stick around for a question and answer session, and I will be glad to address general questions. If you have questions that you feel are useful to everybody, I'll be glad to answer those. If you have something very specific to your industry or your business and you just want to ask me, I'll be glad to stick around and answer those questions as well. Thank you.